Dear students, in this module, we will be covering the population trends in India. The major learning objective is to provide the data related to various vital indicators like population size, growth rate, the sex ratio, the birth rates, death rates, life expectancy, the dependency ratios, and the population aging, its phenomena, with a view to understand the trends that exist in the population data over a period of time, and how India started moving in demographic scenarios is an important objective of this module. If you look at the population size of India, which was 0.36 billion in 1951, has steadily increased to 0.84 billion in 1991, and it moved further to an extent of 1.21 billion as per the latest census of 2011 census. And the graph clearly depicts the steady increase in the population size of India, which was, if you look at in 1901, it was around 238 millions, which came up to 1028 millions in 2001 and further moved to 1210 millions in 2011 census, which clearly indicates the phase in which the population growth is happening in the country. If we take further the density of population, which is an indicator for assessing the extent of population coverage per square kilometer, there is a steady increase in its size. For instance, in the year 1951, the population density in India was as low as 117 persons per square kilometer, whereas in the latest census of 2011, it has increased more than threefold and to the extent of 382 persons per square kilometer, which clearly indicate that the density of population is steadily increasing in the country. And furthermore, if we look at the increase from 1951, it increased to 142 per square kilometer in 1961, further increased to 177 in 71, and in 1981 census it showed to 216, and 267 was in 1991, and further to 325 in 2001 census, and the latest is 382 per square kilometer in 2011 census. The major concentration of population, especially when we talk about the urbanization context, the major cities like Greater Mumbai, Delhi, Kolkata, Chennai, which are major metropolitan cities of India, have a larger share of the growth rate of urban population, which clearly depicts the skewness that exists in the urbanization in the country. If we look at the projected figures for the future, for instance, it is estimated that the population of India is going to be to the extent 1.3 billion by 2021, and further it is going to increase to 1.4 billion by 2026, which clearly indicates that there is going to be an absolute size of population increase over a period of time. But there is a positive thing in this growth is that the rate of population growth is declining over these periods of time, which indicates the success of our small family size norms and also the success to the extent of family planning programs achievements. Now, when we look at the population and also the growth rate over a period, it clearly indicates that when we refer to 1921, which was the period for Great Depression, the growth rate was negative to the extent of minus 0.03, and further from that period onwards, there is a steady increase in the growth rates. Starting from 1931, the extent of growth rate was 1.04, further showed in 1941 1.33, then slight reduction to 1.25, but overall the positive growth continued to show its influence, and it has come to the peak in 1981 to the extent of 2.22%, and from that period there is a steady decline in the growth rate, wherein you can see in 1991 the growth rate is slightly come down to 2.14%, and further it has come down to 1.97% in 2001 census, and the latest census of 2011 showed that it has further reduced to 1.64%. What this clearly indicates is the rate in which the growth is occurring in the case of population size is one way of indication that the growth is decline and the population size is coming down, no doubt about it, but the alarming is in terms of absolute numbers. Let's look at the extent of urbanization. The share of urban population to the total population, no doubt it is increasing, especially from the period of our independence of 1951, wherein the urban population was 17.3%, increased further to 23.3% in 81, furthermore to 27.8% in 2001, and the latest figure is around 1/3 of the total population of India is in urban areas, like to the extent of 31.2%. What clearly indicates is that no doubt the percent of population in urban areas is steadily increasing, but the pace of urbanization in India is slowly coming down, especially from the period 1971 to 2001. At increase in urbanization in absolute numbers has increased the pressure, especially on the urban areas in the services, especially in the infrastructure, housing, environmental degradation, and these are all which are important for quality of life. So this is an indication wherein the quality of life in urban areas also started diminishing. The picture here clearly depicts where not only the population size started showing its improvement over a period of time, especially in urban areas, it is also very interesting that the number of towns or urban agglomerations also started increasing. That means more and more urban areas are started coming up, which is an indicator for the development. In the sense, if you look at the data, well, in 2001 census, it indicated a number of towns and urban agglomerations to the extent of 2,843. If you look at in 2011, it increased steadily to 7,935 urban centers, which clearly indicates that more and more urban growth rate is happening, and also the settlements started coming up, which indicates that our urbanization is in a positive sign of development. But at the same time, if you look at the growth rate, the decadal growth rate of urban population, where it shows that while it was 41% in 1951, it came down to 26% in 1961, and then 38% in 71, further increased in 81 to the extent of 46%, and from there the decline started to 36% in 91, 2001 shows 31%, and almost it is equal in the 2011 census of 31.8%. One of the important contributory factors for urbanization is a migration, wherein the migration as a component of population yearly indicates the extent of people who are moving from various rural areas to the urban places. If you look at the rural-urban migration and the urban all India migration rates, if you look at for 100%, it clearly indicates that there is a slight increase in rural female, especially where in 1983 the percent share of female migrants is 35.1, steadily started showing its increasing trend, and the latest figure of 2007 to 2008 indicates it is almost half of the female population in rural areas can be declared as a migrants, which is a major contributory factor is marriage and other reasons for their migration. Besides urbanization, and two important components of population growth are birth rate and death rates. If we take birth rate, for instance, there is a clear indication that in India the birth rate started showing its declining trend, especially from 1951, which was to the extent of 40.8 births per 1000 live births. It has shown that almost it is half from 1951, and the latest figure of 2012 shows that the reduction is almost half, and it is now the birth rate is 21.6 per 1000 population, which is very clear that the crude birth rate was relatively higher in rural areas than in urban areas, and the latest figure shows that a fertility rate that is expressed through crude birth rate is as high as 23.1 in rural areas, whereas in urban areas it is as low as 17.4%. However, we have to keep in mind that states' performance for birth and death rates are of different nature, especially for states like Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. The birth rates are still higher to the extent of 27.7 and 27.4, while the lowest birth rate can be noticed in the small state like Goa, which is as low as 13.1, which clearly indicates that the emphasis should be by focusing on different states, and its programs and schemes have to be tuned for a state level. When we look at the death rate, it is also very interesting that while death rate was as high as 25.1 in 1951, it is almost one-third of that figure when we see its situation in 2012, where it is almost a single digit of 7%. That indicates that we are successful in achieving or shifting the mortality situation at higher ages, and the less and less number of people are exposed to the risk of mortality. And if you look at this rural-urban context, the differences, the mortality is higher in rural areas to the extent of 7.6%, whereas in urban areas it is low as 5.6%. And the highest death rate was recorded in state of Orissa, which is 8.5%, and Nagaland, which is a small state in northeast, is to the extent of only 3.2%. So that clearly depicts the state-wise variations in the mortality situation. If we take both together, which is expressed as a natural increase, it can be seen that the vital rates both are showing a steady decline over a period of time. For instance, crude birth rate, which was as high as 40.8 in 1951, has come down to 21.6 in 2012, whereas in the case of death rate, which was very high to the extent of 25.1 in 1951, has come down to 7.0. What this clearly indicates that the mortality level has been significantly brought down in the country, whereas birth rate is, though it has come down to half, but still there is a large scope for us to see that it will further come down to these things. And in this regard, rural areas should be the major focus for bringing its rates further to lower levels. While analyzing the mortality, it's very important that we have to bring it with a focus to different age groups, because the risk for mortality is at different levels for different age groups. For instance, very sensitive indicator like infant mortality, which is the age of below 1 year of a child birth, is an important indicator to know the level in which the mortality, overall mortality situation occurs. So if we look at the infant mortality rate, it was as high as 146 in 1951, which has come down steadily to as low as 42 per 1000 live births in 2012. though it is a very significant number, but further reduction is important, where the efforts have to be made so as to see that infant mortality further comes down. Another alarming thing is gender differences in infant mortality. It clearly indicates the neglect shown to female child to the extent 44 is the infant mortality rate for females, whereas in the case of males it is only 41. So that is another area where we have to emphasize how best gender equality can be promoted, wherein the girl child can be taken care of adequately so that the neglect can be minimized. And if you look at over a period of 1951 to 2012, infant mortality rate, which was as high as 146 in 1951, has come down to 110 in 81, further come down to 80 in 1991, and further to 66 in 2001, and the latest is 42 in 2012. The other mortality with respect to age we should see is early childhood, that refers to 0 to 4 years. That is also is a clear indication that there is a lot of reduction that can be noticed in child mortality, which was in 1971 was 51.9, has come down to 12.2 in 2011. That means it is almost 1/4 of the figure in 1951. So nearly 40 years period, this achievement has been noticed. What it clearly indicates that to a great extent the assurance for child survival is existing in the country. However, we have to be very clear that there is a still level is very high, especially in rural areas compared to urban areas, indicating clearly the access to health and also the attention paid to the child is still on a priority in a case of urban areas, whereas in rural areas there is a lot of scope for improvement of increase in the health access, and infrastructure should be the priority. State-wise also it is very clear that most of the northern states like Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, there is a very high level of child mortality, whereas a state like Kerala, which has shown as low as 2.6 and showing a lowest child mortality rate. So that is why state-wise variations should be taken note of while implementing child-related programs in these respective states. So there is a clear-cut reduction that has noticed during the 40 years period when we see the extent of reduction in child mortality. The other dimension in demography is the sex ratio, that is the number of females per 1,000 males. If we look at the extent of sex ratio, which was to the extent of 900 during the period, it has up to 1931, sex ratio was 950 and above for every 1,000 males. So indicating that overall the bias towards the extent of bias or neglect for girl child was not significant in the earlier years, but thanks to the medical technology, which is not in favor of females, it has brought down heavily the reduction of bringing female number into well below the 950. But there is a celebration and a positiveness in the sex ratio, while the sex ratio was to the extent of 940 in 2011, sex ratio was to the extent of 946 in 2011. There is a slight increase in 2011, and also during the last 2 decades this increase started occurring. That shows that there is a realization, and also the health education and awareness creation in the communities towards giving preference to both the sexes, treating both the sexes equally, and also creating awareness about not to neglect the girl child, and also the specific programs for girl child are also showing its results which are reflected in higher and higher sex ratio that started showing in the country. And in this graph, in this data, it is clear that the sex ratio was as high as 972 in 1901, further come down to 964 in 1911, and 955 in 1921. So slowly, every decadal, there is a reduction that has occurred over a period of time. But the reduction was to the extent in 1971 of very high reduction of 930, which has further slightly increased in 81 to 934. But again, it has come down in 1991 to as low as 927. But as we discussed, from the 2001 census onwards, during the last two census periods, there is a positiveness of celebration in which the extent of increase in sex ratio has started showing positive results. So that 933 sex ratio in 2001 has further increased to 940 in 2011. The other indicator is total fertility rate, which is an indicator for fertility level. And if we look at the number of births per thousand during the entire reproductive span, if a woman produces the total number of children as high as 6 was noticed in 1951, while in 2001 it has come down to 3.0. And furthermore, it is expected that the reduction has further brought down to 2.4 during 2011 to 2012, and it is a clear indication that the total fertility rate started declining, which is one of the important achievements that reflects on family planning program and also the people's awareness and recognition to adopt a small family size. However, we have to keep in mind that rural-urban differences still are very large. For instance, TFR in rural areas is still at a higher level of 2.6, whereas in urban areas it has come down to the extent of 1.8. This graph clearly indicates how the total fertility rate over a period started showing its declining trend. For instance, in 1971, TFR was as high as 5.2, has come down to 2.9 in 2004, and from then onwards, there is a slow and steady decline, and the latest of 2009 shows it is 2.6. Another important indicator of reflecting of access to health and the improvement in medical technology and the increase in the health aspects is an indication of life expectancy at birth, which clearly in the case of India, it showed that there is a steady increase in the life expectancy at birth. For instance, while it was around 40 years during the period 1951 to 60, further improved to around 50 years in the mid-70s and further improved to 60 years in 1990s, and during the last 5 to 10 years, the data showed that life expectancy is around 65 years, which shows clearly that the achievement in medical technology and also people's access to health has tremendously improved, and our life expectancy is showing that results. However, the gender differences also we have to keep in mind, where the life expectancy at birth is relatively better for females. It is as high as 67, whereas in the case of males, it is 64, which is universally observed that life expectancy at birth for females is at higher level compared to male. And that graph clearly depicts that the different life expectancies for gender-wise clearly shows that though it is in both the sexes it is increasing, but the significant increase is noticed in the case of female elderly. The resultant factor with all these changes in the demographic scenarios is a major aspect is population aging, which is an indication that the number of elderly population in the total population is increasing. What it indicates is that the percent of elderly population, especially 60 plus, while it was as low as 5.5% in 1951, has increased to 8.6% in 2011. And furthermore, if we see the working age population, it is also slightly increasing from 1951 to 2011, but the childhood population is clearly showing its declining trend, which was indication that the country is moving towards a population aging scenario. Given this, if we look at different age groups, broadly, if we take three segments of population, like a childhood population, working age population, and the elderly population, in these three segments, it is very clear that the childhood population started declining, the working age population more or less is stabilized, but there is a slight increase in the working age population, but the significant change is among the elderly population. That is how the population aging is noticed in the country. One of the indicators for assessing population aging is through median age. When you take median age as an indicator for population aging, it clearly shows that median age is increasing. For instance, while it was as low as 20.5 years in 1961, has steadily increased to 22.5 years in 2001, and furthermore in 2006, it is as high as 23.59, and the projected data shows that it was 25.5 years in 2011, and it is expected to further increase to 31.4 years in the year 2026. So what this clearly indicates is that population aging is here to stay, and we have to be ready to accept this demographic change, where the successful demographic transition, which has brought down the vital events, has shown its influence on median age and also the resultant factor of aging population in our society. This figure clearly indicates the dependency ratio and its changes over a period of time. And we have to be very clear that the childhood dependency ratio started declining, whereas the old age dependency ratio is increasing, and totally, if we look at the increase in the total dependency ratio, which is very important for us to understand that the number of elderly, how they have to be taken care of in our society. Similar is the case when you see the rural-urban differences also, that there is a steady increase in the elderly population, not only in rural areas, but also in urban areas. That is why the elderly population and the total population, if we look at, there is a steady growth in the overall population. Overall, in summary, we can say that in this module, we were able to discuss about the various demographic scenario that is there over a period of time in the country and also across different states, and also the variations that exist between rural and urban areas. And furthermore, gender-wise differences also we have seen with various demographic indicators, starting from population size, its growth rate, sex ratio, the different age groups, proportion of population, the aging and the life expectancy, and also we have seen the median age, how it is increasing. So overall, we can say that the demographic scenario in India is showing a positive trend, wherein one side, the population size no doubt is increasing, but the growth rate started coming down. In the view of that, the urbanization is showing its positive influence. More and more urban towns and urban areas started increasing. Migration is an important factor that contributes for the urbanization. And if we look at the fertility and mortality figures, the mortality and fertility started showing its declining trend. By virtue of that, life expectancy is showing its increasing trend, and overall, the society is experiencing population aging. That is why the aging is an important segment of population when we look at from demographic angle, which requires our attention, and that is how the demography over a period of time is showing that the different age groups and the changes are no doubt are moving in a significant way. However, the successful demographic transition paved the way for population aging, and that is where the society stands as on today.